To examine the practical impact of events from a WPF perspective, let's return to our simple form. And in the last row, let's add a button. We'll give it the content save, and we'll put it in row equal 5. Let's take a look at the design window, and there's our save button ready to go. Let's run the application. We can fill out this form by putting in a name, clicking some of the checkboxes, setting the drop-down, picking a date, and clicking Save. But nothing happens when we click the Save button. And that's because we have not handled the click event on Save. To do so, we need to return to our code and add an event handler for the click event for the button. There are a number of ways to do that. One of the easiest is to go over to the properties window where we have all the properties for the button and click on the event handlers button. Here we see all of the events for this button, and there are a lot of them. The default event is the click event. Once again, there are a number of ways of adding event handlers even within the properties window. For example, you could type in an event handler name, or you can simply double-click and let Visual Studio create the name for you. In this case, button underbar click. It's called button underbar click because we've not named this button. Let's delete button underbar click. Go back to the XAML. Notice that it has a click event handler that's been added. We'll take that out. And this time let's name the button before we ask for an event handler. Let's name the button Save Button. Another way that we can add the event handler is manually right here in the XAML by saying click equals, and again we can type in our own name, or we can just use the new event handler automation from IntelliSense, and if we do that, it will create an event handler for us. Notice this time instead of saying button click, it says Save Button underbar click. It uses the name as the first part and the event as the second part, separated by an underbar. And notice that that shows up in our click event handler window in the properties window. In the code behind, the stub of the event handler has been placed for us, and all we need to do is to implement that event. By convention, all events, and thus all event handlers, have two parameters. The first is always of type object, and that's the sender of the event. The second is always of type routed event args, or a class derived from routed event args, and that is by convention referred to as E. Routed event args actually has nothing in it, but the classes derived from routed event args often will have helpful additional information for handling the event. In our case, what we want to do is to assemble a string based on what the user has entered, and from there we would either add it to a database, write it to a data service, or in this simple case, we'll just pop up a message box. In order to do this, it would be convenient to have the code behind window and the XAML window side by side, and we can do that by just grabbing the XAML window and pulling it off, and then placing it using this window placement. So we'll place it to the right, and now we have the two of them side by side. Let's make a little room by minimizing the Solution Explorer and the Properties window. That allows me to scroll up and find that the first thing that we prompt for is the user's name. Our text box is gathering the user's name, but it doesn't itself have a name, and so we can't refer to it programmatically. So our first task is to give a name to all of those places in our form where we want to be able to gather information or otherwise interact with the object programmatically. So I've named the text box last name. Similarly, I've named the radio buttons male and female. I've named each of the checkboxes individually, and I've named the combo box as job. Finally, I will name the calendar, which I've named delivery date. With all of that in place, we're ready to come back to our event handler and begin to assemble the string that is going to represent all of this data. Let's rename the text box full name since we're prompting for the full name, not the last name. And come over to the Save button, click, and add a object of type string builder. SB will be our string builder. We're now ready to add the contents of the text box full name. Let's append to the string builder the string full name equals, or full name colon, better. And then we can append to the string builder the contents of that text box. And the way we get the contents of the text box is that we put in the name of the text box and then we get its text property. Let's append whether or not they are male or female. And here we need to get a little bit more clever. We want to put male if the male radio button has been checked, and otherwise female. So what we're going to do is check whether the male radio button is checked, convert that to a Boolean because it is normally a nullable Boolean, and if it is checked, return male, otherwise return female. On the right-hand side, we note that the next thing we're gathering after male and female are the three checkboxes, desktop, laptop, and tablet. If the desktop is checked, we will add desktop to the string. Otherwise, we will add an empty string. Let's do the same thing for laptop and tablet. In a real application, we might want to add a little more logic in case none of them is checked. After we gather the computer type, next we obtain the job from the combo box. And we do that by obtaining the selected item out of the job combo box and calling toString on that to ensure that what we get is a string version of whatever's in the combo box. And finally, we ask for the selected date out of the delivery date calendar and convert that to a string. Now that we have our complete string, we can add a message box, call show on the message box, and pass in SB toString, which will turn our string builder into a string and place it in the message box. Let's run this application and see how it does at gathering data. Put in a name, say that I'm working on a tablet and a laptop, that my job is programmer, a delivery date of April 25th, and let's click save. Up pops our message box, and you can see that the fields have been filled in with one problem. The job is listed as System Windows Controls Combo Box Item Programmer. We would like that to say just Programmer. We'll take a look as we go further at how to work with combo boxes and other lists to format both what is displayed and what comes back out of them using data templates. But that's a little bit later in this course. Note that the click on the button is not the only event that might be handled with this form. For example, we might want to take some action each time the user changes their selection on their job. In that case, we would return to the XAML, find the combo box, and add an event handler for the selection changed event. I took the default job selection changed. I can right-click and say navigate to event handler. Notice that this method has an object as its first parameter, but the second parameter is a selection change event args. That, of course, derives from the routed event args, but provides additional information that might be useful when handling a selection change event. If we look at IntelliSense of what's under E, added items is here, which is a list that contains all of the items that were selected. The original source is here, and we'll talk in future about original source, but the sender may not be the actual original source of the event. Here we can get to that. And a number of other useful bits of information are available. We want to know the added items, and it's plural because you might have a multi-select box. So let's go ahead and say that we're going to capture the added items. We'll put the first item in the added items collection, and that with a single selection box will be the only item, into a variable, newly selected items. We'll create a message box and show that, and we will simply add toString to the newly selected items. Let's start the application, and each time we choose a job, the message box comes up and shows us that in fact it has handled that event. There are many other events we might handle. We might want notification each time one of the checkboxes is checked, one of the radio buttons is changed, each time something's typed into the text box. So event handlers can proliferate throughout your code. But they all work essentially the same, which is that you are passed an object, which is the sender, and a routed event arg or something derived from it with additional information.